From the heart of local government to the forefront of AI innovation, today's episode bridges the world of public service and cutting-edge technology. Joining me today is Sabina Zafar.
Because I was a techie, and then, all of a sudden this techie turned public servant is what I like to call myself.
Sabina's story is a fascinating tale of how technology and community intersect. As a former vice mayor and council member, she brought a unique tech-savvy perspective to local governance.
An amount of information that traverses through and just sits in silos that cannot be shared. Can you even imagine a central repository for governments to be able to tap into each other's resources and make the best decisions based on that and learn from each other?
And now, as a leader in AI, Sabina is at the cutting edge of technological advancement, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the digital era.
The conversation always starts from the coolest factor of AI, goes down to automation, and then really down to where is your data? Is it in the right place? Is it the right data? Does it need cleansing? Does it need to be massaged before it's ready?
Today, Sabina and I discuss her insights on the power of AI in community building and the role that it plays in governance. And we'll talk about the evolving landscape of public service in the digital age.
You just struck a chord in my heart with that.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Sabina. I have a lot to talk about, especially in the AI world. But when I was looking and I saw, since the last time we chatted, you were actually vice mayor and council member of San Ramon in local government. I have to know a little bit about that experience for you, because that's such a public sector, and it's so fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I know it kind of put me on the radar for a lot of people because I was a techie, and then, all of a sudden this techie turned public servant is what I like to call myself. I think part of the passion and the journey was that I'd lived in San Ramon for a while. I'd been part of the community, raised my kids there. I was the PTA mom, the Rotary member, all of those things people do to get more involved with the community. And what I realized as the community grew, San Ramon especially, from doubled in size from the time I moved there to 10 years later when I decided to run for office, that the community grew very quickly. There were reasons why I had moved there as well, which was, public safety and, great schools. But as my kids grew older, I grew up as a parent from PTA. I started exploring how next could I help my community. And what I started paying attention to was that this was a community of folks that were highly educated, a lot of them working in technology, commuting like most of us, and yet we didn't have representation or a seat at the table. So my representation or my council looked very different than what the community itself looked. And I who's going to represent, really our interests, things that we as young parents that have raised our kids here and now kind of want our government to serve us better at a level that we expect from technology companies too. And how do we tap into the brain power of the larger community? And I looked around and I said, well, I guess it has to be me. and that's kind of how I started getting involved. I had, interestingly, because I was that PTA mom, was involved with the schools, I had a lot of students that came on this as part of my journey. So without me actually thinking about it, I was able to motivate some of our young people and high schoolers to become part of my journey as well. And I think for me, that was the most heartwarming and the best things I could have given back to my community, is getting young people involved in our local politics and our local, with the way things are run. Because a lot of times we don't pay attention, right? You have a group that's paying the taxes and that's doing the work, and you have a group that's managing all of it, and they're not well connected. So really, that was the reason why I decided to run for office and serve my community, represent. And I think my big achievement was from day one that I wanted to start a technology and innovation committee, which could tap into the brain power of the citizens of San Ramon. And that, I would say, would be one of my biggest achievements, to be able to get a committee together that tapped into some of the folks that were really the smartest people that lived in the city, but were not getting pulled into how they could give back to our local government and be part of that voice. So that was, a little bit, I would say the experience, certainly humbling and phenomenal. I got to meet so many people as part of that larger network, got to really understand my community and the people that lived in it even more. And like I said, I also had a youth internship program over the summer where I would bring in about 10 to 12 interns over the summer and kind of expose them to what government was all about. And some of these kids have written back letters and said, because of you, we never thought that going into poli-sci or going into public service would be an option. And because of that experience, we actually are now exploring that as we go into college. So I'm
That's
hoping
so
that
great to hear.
great kids that are going to come back and serve that community too.
That's so great to hear because yeah, democracy is a participatory sport. I mean, just to like, hey, who's going to do this? Well, it should be me. I think that and I'm really interested in that decision process because when you think of politics, you think of gridlock, you think of endless, you think of it's hard to get anything done. Especially sometimes in California politics, and coming from the tech industry where everything's move fast, try not to break things. Just you have a little bit more control over, how quickly you can move. How do you kind of balance that those different paces, and what did you see different?
Yeah, I think I had a change of mindset as well as I got more involved, right? Because now the way you're looking at every decision is, and especially when it comes to spending money, it's the taxpayer dollars. And how do you represent those taxpayer dollars where you maximize the benefits of your community and yet you make the right decision, which not everybody might agree with either. So you very quickly learn that not everybody's going to be in your camp, and no matter, what decision you make, and that's why you put in a leadership position there to make the right decision for your residents, for the whole community. Because most of the time you will hear people that come and speak in City Hall are people that have been coming there for years. They're the loudest voices, but then this whole community, which is not coming out there on 7 p.m. to talk about their issues, want to be heard. And how do you make sure you represent those voices as well? How do you spend that money? And again, we do complain about the long process that is government sometimes, but part of that process is because we have to have 3 meetings, for example, uh, public meetings. People have to know that this is happening. Again, it goes back to those tax dollars that you're now spending. None of it is your personal or corporate money. The other thing which I was a big proponent of and I pushed for was the private-public partnership, because that really and truly allows people to partner with some of the private entities to do something for the greater good of the community. Tapping into funds, getting resources from other places, because how do governments function, right? Either they tax you and raise money that way, or they find other ways. And obviously your tax dollars don't go 100% into your community. They're distributed over federal, state, and local taxes. So how do you get some of those funds? So a lot really what I learned was how to be frugal and how to really, find out other sources of funding, some of the things you want to do, and build those public-private partnerships for the greater good of the community. So I think that's, and then there are things that you try to accelerate as well. One great example is we all know what happened when the pandemic hit us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was actually in Seattle and I had a work meeting and I wanted to, this was right before the pandemic happened, and I wanted to do a virtual meeting, which we should have something in place, right? And we didn't. So we tried to stitch together a Skype meeting and put in a big TV in City Hall, and I was on this big TV being projected. And it was really not the norm at local governments. And then a month later, the pandemic hits, and everybody's kind of scrambling. What do we do? For us at corporate, virtual meetings were the norm always. And we didn't even blink about, especially when you're in large corporations that are global, everything is about virtual meetings and how they're connected. So that shift happened with Zoom, right? I just saw how quickly Zoom had gotten themselves ready to come into these local bodies. You saw one city adopt Zoom, then another agency adopt Zoom, and before you know it, it was all over the place. And it was actually hard to get people off that once the pandemic was over because they were so used to one, that transparency. Because I would always talk about, I'm like, why does somebody have to show up at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night in City Hall when they're at home feeding their kids just back from a long commute? This is the kind of transparency we should have. And I almost think like that wish got granted without with the pandemic. As painful as it was, it's now become more of a norm that these meetings have to be broadcast through the latest and the newest technology. So sometimes these tipping points help us improve government and accelerate it faster when we have to. And sometimes
Yeah.
we just, are still stuck in the process.
You touched on so many different points there, from both the public and private sector partnership to then also to, I mean, San Ramon, if I remember correctly, was one of the very first counties when the pandemic started to kind of start putting, measures in place to protect its citizens. And I'm sure you were just drinking from the fire hose of information, and having to make, really tough decisions at that time with limited information and having to parse through that. And I think, where I really see a interesting use cases, bringing it back to AI, is like, had you had, the ability to summarize, decipher some of that information in greater detail, how that may have changed some of the thinking, how that may have changed some of the different ways that, imagine all the transcripts being recorded from those public things, so that if I wasn't there as a citizen, I could just what was talked about in terms of this public policy. So what are some of the ways that you're actually seeing how AI is being implemented that you wish you would have had when you were, at the when you were, vice
Jake,
mayor and city council?
you just struck a chord in my heart with that. I mean, so on an average city council meeting, you get about a package for 700 pages that you only have 5 days to read. Like that's the official, when that packet has to come out. Citizens
Wow.
and city council members. It's not humanly possible. If somebody tells me they read every page, I will not believe them. So the power of AI to be able to synthesize that information and give me a summary that I can consume, take out the major points. Like, I wish I had that 4 years ago, and I would be like, oh my God, OpenAI, you came out 4 years later. Being able to use that, I think that's the, intelligent document processing is what can change government for us in so many ways. Right now, government is all about documentation, preserving documentation. And the other thing which is happening is, right, a lot of people that have been in local government, at least in our city, are aging out. And there's a new crop of people that are coming in, and there is 30 years of history. I mean, cities get built on this history of doing the right things at the right time. And imagine just training those people that are just coming in, whether it's a new, finance director, whether it's a new city manager. How do they learn from what historically happened, why decisions were made? That documentation alone is a use case. And like I said, as a council member, if I had access to where I could get my, summary of what was in there, would have benefited me so much more. And same with the residents, right? It's transparency again for the residents to be able to synthesize and know because a lot of times people will complain, we don't know when this decision was made. Now the city will do everything to put out, the notices. Then they'll put it in the public meetings, which are generally your city council meetings. But there's still not a good way for people to know what's happening till it's
Mm-hmm.
happened. And then they're like, wait, when did this bridge get approved? We didn't know about. So being able to use AI to summarize and send that information to the residents, to be able to help the city council members summarize that information, for us to do some of the homework on, getting all that data and seeing what other cities are doing in a meaningful way, I think AI would just be such a, that assistant of us, that we don't get as city council members, right?
Mhm.
We're paid very little. It's a part-time job in most cities. So we're doing double duty, and to have like a virtual agent as such, as a council member would be phenomenal. For I would have loved to have that.
I have a friend that works at one of the local water municipalities, and she says, most of our budget is spent on consultants writing reports about things that are happening to make decisions that
Mhm.
sometimes take 8 months, however long, and then they just sit there. They're not shared. For instance, each water company across the nation is doing these
Yep.
same kind of things, and you just touched on a point there, like the fact that they're not even being shared. I mean, I can imagine that looks like your TV came on.
All right.
But I could imagine the just how much locked up information is there, how many just insights, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all of this information that has been sanctioned and kind of written is public domain,
It's
correct? Like it should
all
be out
public.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all public domain. It's all in some form of written material. We have over 480 cities alone in California. And that's just one agency. So what you brought is like how disconnected these agencies are. You obviously have the city council, which is one agency. You have the water boards, you have the waste management, and these are all elected roles as well that people are in, right? And then on to layer on top of that, you have the state government, you have the federal government, and the amount of information that traverses through and just sits in silos that cannot be shared. Like, can you even imagine a central repository for governments to be able to tap into each other's resources and make the best decisions based on that and learn from each other? We would generally go to these couple of conferences a year and start talking to other council members and learn a lot about, hey, this has been happening somewhere in Southern California. We could adopt that. But having access to that information for cities, especially the wastage that happens in that management piece of this information and how much money we spend our budget on that alone, like you said, the consultants, it's sometimes it's just I would say mind blowing
Yeah.
on how much and how efficient government could become by connecting all these pieces together. Um, AI is, as much as this word gets overused, AI can truly, and I know the intelligent document processing particularly can bring all of this together into this one whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. And I think this is where the public-private sector can come into. And I think that, one of the things that I just imagine, which would be fantastic thing to have, would be, in California, we always get those voter books, right? You
Um,
get like a little blurb, you get what's put in there about your local judge, your local whoever. You have no idea what they've done,
Mhm.
especially if any elected. You're usually just, you either abstain or you just pick someone, right? Generally, probably along party lines. I could really imagine a world where it just not only has like, here's everything that this person has voted on, done,
Mhm.
said, reported on, so you can actually make real decisions on how your vote gets cast through local officials that you may not pay attention as much to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know some people that are working on systems to tap into some of that information. But again, right, as a more intelligent person voting, like you said, especially the judges, like people who are super involved as well have no idea what the judges and how to vote that way. And we've seen how much that impacts how our lives are now decided and how we choose to live our lives in this country. So yeah, absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think too, I think where it can also come into is just a level of transparency in government. I think that, being able to just, see, summarize it, find these and just give more participatory, because I think people would want to participate and understand, but it's just been a challenge because even the same, like we talk about when a bill comes out, right? We see this with our regular Congress, right? They have this giant 300-page bill that nobody really knows what's in there, and then it gets rushed through with just little tidbits that come out.
Mhm.
Like when the AI regulatory executive order came out, the first thing I did was upload it and start chatting with the PDF, right? So I could actually see how what was in there and how it would affect my
Yeah, yeah.
business. It's really could potentially change a lot of things. What so as we talk about the public service and now kind of going in in now kind of back in the private sector focusing on AI, and as the CEO of the AI Cloud Consulting Group, this is a significant shift. What are you seeing in the market now where you've seen businesses getting real return on investments, and putting AI gets those are two letters that get thrown around, but really at the end of the day, what are the business cases that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I would say a big one is just pure automation of repetitive tasks, right? That's at the heart and the core of what automation started with. How do you take these things where people are spending like 30% of their day, nurses, for example, are spending 30% of their day in administrative tasks, writing up things, and instead of taking care of patients. So some of it started creeping up during the pandemic, actually, when, when we had these massive cases, when the workloads became phenomenal, and there were a lot of patients in there. So the early use cases of AI, actually, the pandemic was what was used to test these out in some of the hospitals, to see how the nurses, the workload of these repetitive tasks could be taken away from the nurses, and then, so they could really focus on the patients. So that's been a big one, to start off with, and now it's being built upon. How do you go more into patient care? How do you use AI to augment what the doctors are doing? Report writing and script, dictations and things like that, which were, again, very manual, given off to offshore teams to write them up and then send them over. Now the transcription is now being converted into how AI can just kind of take all that paperwork, handwritten notes, everything, and really convert it into some meaningful medical records. Um, Another one is, again, talking about the medical field, how to connect the different disconnected systems. One of the reasons why, one information which may be in a CRM to, then goes into a patient record, to goes into a system like Epic, for example, it's all been disconnected, and being able to connect those pieces, with AI and automation, now with computer vision, as you know, is a big part of what's really enabled AI to be able to read through now. So, with that computer vision, being able to read the information using ML to kind of, understand that information and then really be able to run some of those processes, whether it's like in medicine, whether it's in the banking industry, right? Where especially places like wealth management and these small community banks that don't have access to as many resources can be more efficient. One of the greatest examples I love is your mortgage application. Like AI has really changed the way some of the companies that have chosen to adopt AI and run their mortgage applications. Like you'll know within minutes now whether you're approved or not, and you don't have to go through. I remember buying a house 15 years ago and buying a house like 2 years ago, and the experience was so different because all I had to do was make sure my documents were in one place and I didn't have to worry about it. And within hours, I was getting answers back instead of, taking days for somebody to process that information, put that information for the underwriter to get it. And then, you know, So that's where the repetitive tasks is where I'm really seeing that AI is being used the most as people are learning as well. Obviously, their use cases. We're talking about hyper personalization now. Chatbots are on the rise. The virtual assistants, right? The new
Hmm.
version of the chatbots are really like, and end of this year, I think early this next year, we start seeing a lot more of those virtual assistants, whether they're in your bank or on your airline, or, you go to a retail site where they start actually having a conversation with you, and, the whole combination of conversational and generative where they learn and then they answer and they learn again and they tell you the right answer. So that I think experience is going to significantly change for people. And, that's kind of the cool side of AI, which people will be able to see. But then what's that going to do is make sure that it connects all these processes in the back as well, right? Which means people have to make sure all their data is uploaded in the right place. Because, as we're talking about AI and as we're talking about AI giving the right answer, we also know that AI might give you the wrong answers.
Hmm.
AI might make up things, right? So, how do you make sure that the data is ready for you to be able to run those AI workloads? So the conversation always starts from the coolest factor of AI, goes down to automation, and then really down to where is your data? Is it in the right place? Is it the right data? Does it need cleansing? Does it need to be massaged before it's ready? So that again, we have the right information for the right people. And otherwise, uh, we're going to get the wrong answers. And AI is not shy of giving you the wrong answers either. It'll just give
No,
you,
it'll confidently tell you that it knows that answer, and especially when you're talking about things like medical advice, that's very important.
yeah.
Even I think we hold AI a little bit higher to standards. Like, well, it got it wrong. Like, how many times has a doctor made a wrong analysis or something like that? But you definitely touched on a few things, especially in the medical industry. I think I heard that a lot of what a doctor's job or what they do day to day is just answering like through their portal, like, hey, look at this rash, is this, tell me this, and being able to just have those automated responses that they can just review and be like, yep, that was there. Like, definitely having the human in the middle just saves massive amount of times. And you talked about multimodal, now that they can do videos and images. I'm going to be fascinated to see what the emergent properties that come out of that, because just by force feeding these models with massive amounts of text, we got all these things like logic, reasoning,
So
storytelling. When we start feeding it audio, video, images, what are now some of those patterns that it's going to recognize? It's really fascinating.
definitely.
Yeah. Um, so you also touched a little bit on the data or the data piece. So you talked about how eventually you're going to start seeing a lot of these virtual assistant chatbots. I know for a fact that you're going to start seeing these out because we've been implementing a lot of these for my customers, and a lot of people are doing them internally right now to make sure
Mhm.
that they're not hallucinating. But we kind of see this same story arc. You kind of get this, POC that's like, oh, look at this chatbot. It can tell us, what our HR thing is. And then there's this moment of excitement. And then quickly they realize that, oh, we have to get our data in the
Okay.
right area. Now, instead of this like cool factor, it's now I'm a data janitor. um, Talk a little bit about how people and executives should be approaching that, so that they can make sure that they're, you know, getting and training chatbots that are giving accurate results.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been in this world, Bradley, long enough where we've constantly dealt with that data issue, right? The data is not in the right place. The data is, we can't build an application on it because the data is stuck in some legacy systems. The data is not reachable. The data is just doesn't fit a template, so you can't upload it. I think part of what those, the last 10 years of pain points dealing with data and trying to build these ETLs and all the other things to get data to get into the cloud. I think what AI is now and automation is helping us talk to all systems. One, that still requires some form of a data cleansing. And that's still going to be very important for as people make decisions about how they're going to implement the newer technologies on top. How will they have their data in place where it's consumable, where it's clean, where it makes sense and gives you the right answers, but also the bias in data uh, for
Hmm.
historical reasons exists as well. And how do we address some of that too? And so I think data prep will continue to be one of the priorities that execs have to do. A small example, like, as I'm thinking about going into the new year, I want to clean up all old emails, my spam, everything has been cut that's come through my Gmail, because I'm going to start building on that Gmail to get some of the answers. But if it's just full of, spam building up on year over year, and I keep buying more storage, adding more storage, cloud storage, and just storing it in there, I've got these pictures which like are blurry and not making sense. Like that's kind of the house cleaning you do for yourself anyways, so that you don't start incurring more costs as well. And that's a huge factor that executives have to take into account, that if they continue to stick with that old legacy crappy data as well, the amount of work they're giving up and not doing it means they're just going to incur more costs, because data has a price, data storage has a price to it. And so, really, if they can spend that time getting the data in the right place, cleaning it up, and spending some time, the benefits are going to be far greater than just taking the existing data and saying, just build something fully on top of it and we'll figure out this later. Because we always know the later is like, bad. That later is a worse nightmare than if you were already ready for it. So I
Exactly.
would
Yeah.
say, consider the cost of storing that data. Consider, you know, uh, what, as far as AI goes, what are some of the biases in their data? What are some of the things which no longer needed? And what are the things that are needed? So that initial investment in getting the data the right place, getting their connectivity in place, is going to, I think, make you much more successful than starting, going backwards. You could, and then figure it out, but that it out is what we've always been doing. We've just been building system upon system upon system till it's like the whole thing is blowing up. And it's like, why do we have so many systems in place? 50 of them doing the same thing at some of these large organizations as well.
Yeah. It never, I, I work with a lot of different organizations, and it never ceases to amaze me how much SaaS overlap there is, how much data sprawl there is. I mean, you talk about, moving data from one place to another. I've built numerous businesses where that, the whole reason, and a lot of IT teams, yeah, my content management system's on this one, I need to move it over to this one. My lead generation is on this one, I need to move it to this one. It seems like we've just been moving data from one place to another for the past like 20 years. And now we're at a place where we can actually start synthesizing it and actually use AI to actually help
Yeah.
organize
Yeah.
it. So, what are the duplicates? What are the things? Is this documentation for the product actually matching what the code does? These types of automation processes. It's funny you mentioned Gmail. I have a project this holiday to go through. I've been having different labels for like good responses that I like to start building my own knowledge base, labels for ones that do automatic replies or at least creates the draft for it. Because you're right, there's a lot of um, knowledge locked up in your own Gmail or your own email that could be useful to yourself.
Yeah.
Um, how do you kind of see? So I know you have a lot of you had a lot of experience at like GE and Oracle, and kind of working inside of those large organizations. And for anyone that might either be at one of those organizations that may be having slow or just maybe they're slow to adopt AI, right? Because I think a lot of companies are in this like wait and see, or they have privacy concerns, they have something like that. What kind of advice would you give anyone either working at those companies or thinking about, in their careers, how they could use this moment to really kind of further their career?
Yeah, and large corporates are very interesting. So, when I joined GE, that was my biggest large corporate that I joined. And it was very different than the smaller companies and startups like Community that we worked out, right? One, there is so much overlap of talent, people doing the same thing in silos, and just people that have been at these companies for years. And reskilling and upskilling is one of the things which I think people need to, and especially leaders need to start investing in these companies. So almost to create these citizen programmers that can now program and build on top of AI. Because what I see, especially like at a company like GE, where there were 8 different businesses, GE Digital was kind of going to be that underlying layer that was going to combine all of that data and build that common technology there. I think GE Digital was soon for too early for their times. If GE Digital had existed today, which now GE is 3 distinct companies, 3 different businesses, but if GE Digital, which was supposed to be this business combining all the data business for all the other larger businesses in the age of AI, it would have been much more successful, because the whole idea was, how do you share the products, the knowledge across the different businesses to perform your best. And I think what part of it would happen is that people were there too long, and sometimes people get complacent in their roles, and then eventually companies start laying off because they want people out. But instead of that, if you continue to invest in the education and upskilling of people, you will get those citizen developers, because people are very smart, right? You will get those citizen developers that are now proponents of doing the right thing for the company as well, instead of sometimes holding on to their old roles. A company like Oracle, right? It's a database company. That's how it started. And then they ended up acquiring 150 different companies. So Oracle is made up of all these different products that are, siloed
Yeah.
and sold separately. But the common thread continues to remain that data. And, as Oracle launched the autonomous database, the whole role of the DBA was no longer there. But the biggest challenge with some of our largest enterprise customers was that they had these huge DBA teams. And there was no way you can convince them to, fire, and you shouldn't have to fire the entire DBA team and just put in an autonomous database and, let it run its own patch, heal, whatever it needs to do. And so the conversations I would constantly have is, how do you upskill your teams so that they feel relevant? They don't feel like, they'll be disrupted by a 25, 26-year-old who's just come in, that AI is going to take over their jobs, because human in the loop and people are just as relevant as these higher level AI jobs get developed too, right? If you start looking at how many people are looking out to hire for AI developers, if they started investing in their own people and made them those developers and reskilled and upskilled them, I think that would be the best investment a company can do back in its people, and hire the people that they're looking to hire, instead of looking outward and, there's a huge lack of those skill sets. So that would really be my advice. People are smart. They've worked in tech all these years. This is what you and I have done, right? We've constantly reinvented ourselves over the course of a career. AI wasn't there 20 so years ago when we graduated from college. And, it's something that's new, and we continue to learn, and there's no reason why organizations as a whole cannot adopt that policy of reskilling workforce, and really augmenting, and not make, it's the interesting. Somebody said, we have AI robots so that people don't work like robots. Um,
Yeah.
and that's how we need to
I
think about the future.
That's a very good point right there. Like we have AI robots, so humans don't have to work like AI robots. Like we put so much emphasis, and sometimes like our entire day is just stuff that are just routine things that kind of just drain the creative energy out of that. And I think upscaling and reskilling, I think is one of the things that's just really, if anyone's out there thinking like, oh, is AI going to take my job? Is a because when I go into some of these, you know, offices, half the people are like, great, we're going to be automated, and half the people are like, are they here to take my job? Right.
Yeah.
So, but once we kind of put the systems in place and they understand, oh, okay, I can actually have more time to do the things that I actually want to do. All this work log of all those, every single team has that list of, oh, it would be nice if, but only time, right? It really helps you kind of work through those backlogs and reduce some of that mundane work. And then, two, the things that you thought you would never be able to do. I have employees that never wrote a single line of code that are now doing basic, query scripts because it's easier than asking an engineer to do it. I had, my assistant, building out entire, blogs and,
So
the design for it, using, Leonardo AI and all these different creative tools that they never would have a million years thought that they would be doing. But these are the types of opportunities that have just recently become available that, and I think too, one of the things that's a challenge is that people think of AI and they think of it as technical. When
yeah.
at the end of the day, especially with generative AI, it's just being very descriptive and being very clear about what you're asking to do, which then helps up level your communication with humans, I've
Yeah.
found.
Absolutely. I have a friend, she's a fashion designer, and she was telling me how much AI she uses at her fingertips to, she's like, it's a very tedious job as a designer of some clothing to know the weight of things, to know, how the colors will mix and all of that. But she's got 4 AI applications now that she's like, those are my virtual assistants. Like I go in and I find out and I figure out and I know the exact weight, and she's doing this offshore as well. So it's kind of democratized the world in a way that anybody from anywhere in the world has access to this information that they can now use to create something. So when we also think about, um, playing the, leveling the playing field for people across the world, we think of, what we're doing in terms of sustainability to rise people out of poverty. Like AI will truly become that. Like you said, content writing, where English, if not the primary language of French, you could write all of that in whatever language you chose now because AI is there to help you as a tool. You still add your voice, you still have to tell it what to do, but it's that virtual assistant that kind of, if you wanted to tomorrow be moved to France and write in French, you could do it, right? Because
Yeah.
you have a tool that helps you do that. And similarly, with people around the world that may not have access to jobs or, the level of pay that we might are now have access to that because they are able to articulate themselves in a way which become more democratized, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of those tools that's just so novel because, it's also a tool that can also teach you how to use it. Like Salesforce isn't going to tell you how to use Salesforce. You have an entire team writing knowledge base articles and things like that to tell you
Mhm.
that. This is literally a tool that you can ask it and you can learn. We've gone through from the, textbook, I have to go out and do the research and learn this to now a personal tutor in my language that can adapt to how I learn and can understand. And I think that, if you're not taking advantage of its learning capabilities, I think that I think that's one of the most fascinating things for me is I've just learned so much. So In terms of like kind of your, so we talked about like the importance of data and making sure that, they're not hallucinating, especially with like, medical,
Mhm.
but also too in the public service, like as, companies kind of, or not companies, but governments inevitably will start rolling this out. How do you think of like, um, the ability for us to understand what is coming out of a response? So, a lot of things go into a response, from its training data to its alignment issues. Some of them are closed, some of them are open. How do you, especially in terms of like, kind of pulling it back to government, how do you
Yep.
see like that trust factor factoring into this?
Well, one is the transparency of all that information available to public, right? The fact that it's already available. Everything that the government puts out is public information. So in some form, it's already available. And being able to make it available in a form that it can be searched is an important first step. We'd probably have to put policies and guardrails around some of that information item, at least the way I see it. And I almost see it as a government AI, like we would have the gov clouds and we would have information, then we have the health clouds, which store certain information and adhere to certain policies within those clouds. In a similar fashion, how do we make sure that AI also adheres to some of those policies as we build and that information is available? Because again, we know that in politics and government, there's also a lot of, well, I would say less so in government and more so in politics, there's a lot of bias based information. And one of the challenges,
One real thing, explain that difference between government and politics. I think a lot of people, think of them as one and the same.
yeah.
Um, yeah, explain that difference real quick.
Yeah, so the difference is, right, government is an organization run by very specific rules that are followed, and really you can't, get out of that, and you have to function within a certain guardrail. When it comes to politics, and that's why I never like to call myself a politician, but a public servant, because when it comes to politics, right, it's been so convoluted by what we're seeing, the divisiveness in the world that's happening. It's divided us more than it's brought us together, and people have used social media and media to fuel that as much as they could, right? And then you have people with differing opinions, whether you are a conservative, whether you are, more of a liberal. You have your point of view. You think a certain way, you want a certain representation, and both those sides should be respected. Which government doesn't care, right? Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, I'm representing everybody in my city because they're the people of my city. When it comes to politics, it kind of puts people in these two camps, and the flow of information can, get out of control. Now, all of that is gonna, is all available and online, and that would play its role in the information that we get. So if you look me up and somebody's added some comments about me, which may not be true, when you go and do a search, it's probably going to pull all of that and say Sabina Zafar this and this and this, and she's also this, which may not be true, right? And so, how do you make sure that that information, which is untrue, and comments and biases that exists on the internet, um, are managed as well? Versus when you talk about government, right? A lot of it is just pure information, which is available, which is factual based. People have done research on it. Like you said, the consultants have gone in and actually spent those 9-10 months, but really done the fact finding, the right information, and all of it is there. So government data is generally fact based, which is great, right? Which is exactly what you want to search, things that are factual. And then, you go into the politics side of things, and things may not always be factual and more opinion based. So I don't want to be, an expert on that one. I think I am trying to understand that world as well, that how are we going to manage, the facts versus the comments that are part of, some of these posts and things that have been done to use social media to create those biases. Um, how are we going to deal with that? I think that's going to be the next big thing that government needs to take a look at in partnership with the private sector as well. Because I think this is where that collaboration is going to define our future in so many ways, right? This is our kids growing up and they'll be living in this world. Just like, 20 years ago, the smartphone wasn't an option, right? Now it's
Mm.
like, can you live without it? For the kids, for,
Yeah.
even the 2-year-olds, it's like the norm. Like, what are you talking about? You didn't have a phone that you would just pick up and play your games on. You had to have this big monitor and connected
Yeah,
and,
I find myself being back in my day
yeah.
a lot more. I love that. That you brought up that distinction between government and politics because you're right. Like government, and I've probably read more of these, reports. They're very neutral. They're very fact based. This is this. This is this. Policy papers, those types of things. They obviously have agenda. They obviously have a persuasion behind it. That's the whole point. Is to, hey, we need to change or amend this law or keep the current status quo. That is politics and it's general. And I think that the two, when you think in terms of AI, government sounds great. Like, hey, here's the laws that you have to abide by. Here's the
Mhm.
alignment that you should be trained on. Because at the end of the day, this could also help up level, just the what we're getting out of the government workers. Because at the end of the
Mhm.
day, we are still all humans, and
Yeah.
whether we try to or not, inherently bias will go into the work that we do. So I think that one of the ways that I use AI a lot is to find that hidden bias, find those blind spots. Um, and then with politics, I think going into 2024, that's the more scarier piece because of the persuasion. How do you see AI playing a role in this upcoming election?
Oh gosh. It's going to be one big experiment, in my opinion. I mean, do you think AI is ready to handle all of all of this information? We know, we've already created some form of that distrust in the past elections from other social medias, and
I think AI
now,
is ready. I don't know if we are.
yeah, you think, yeah, I think we are ready for it or not. Again, no matter what information you put out there, somebody's going to think there's a bias, right? And that is probably going to get tested out in 2024 and maybe fully refined in 2028. Um, but I think definitely, if I was running for an election, I would have so much more at my fingertips in terms of research and data and information that I can use to uh, put out a much more effective message, right? It's always during election time that you try to understand what are the people in your city looking for? What are their top priorities? Like, short of going and that's what I would do, knock on every door and talk to people. How do you find that information? Because now most of the people are online anyways. So being able to pool and understand what are they saying on Nextdoor, what are they saying, on these user groups, Facebook, wherever online, it will help you carve out almost, what are the priorities for your residents and where do they want to go. And I think that in itself is very powerful when you can understand at some level what are the priorities of the people that are just speaking online, right? Because it's a very different group that speaks online and a very different group that comes and still writes papers and speaks at your council meeting. So you hear loud and clear with people are coming and telling you or talking to you or approaching you for coffee, but you really never get to hear what, all these comments and feeds and everything that are out there and people are saying those things. and are angry at the government, probably, most of this would be, I'd imagine, negative comments too, saying, yeah, why did they dig up that hole? Or why is my tree not pruned and all of those things? So to be able to understand that, your citizens better in that context would be helpful. And I think similarly to get a pulse of what the country is thinking right now and be able to do that analyst research, which would take hours and hours understanding, AI is going to help accelerate that so much. And I can tell you, these interns and kids that are going from college straight into some of these campaigns are way, way smarter.
Hmm.
And they love to, they're going to be utilizing this technology more and more. So AI will certainly have an impact on how information is analyzed, way different than what it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, all the same things that excited me. So, with my experience in, A/B testing, personalization and marketing, to get the right message in front of your consumers, to get the right message that your brand is putting out there. Some of those same, obviously politics is also marketing my
Mhm.
message, marketing my ideas. Um, but as it's also said that there's a fine line between marketing and manipulation.
Mhm.
And we saw how social media was used, and how regular digital marketing tactics were used in prior elections. I'm just very curious to see then how, like you said, these interns coming out that are coming up with these, it's going to be a very interesting year, to say the least.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
so as we're thinking about 2024, here we are at the end of the year. What where do you think we'll be at 1 year from now, and what are some of the, like, I think, what are you hopeful for in terms of where we'll be and what challenges we'll overcome?
yeah. So the way I'm looking at it is we'll see a lot more adoption happening next year. Just, some of the larger companies have been doing the background work, kind of getting their data sets ready, um, talking to companies on how they can go on this journey. I would say it's still going to come the later part of next year where we'll see companies truly adopting some of the AI best practices and implementing them. As I'm looking at conferences next year and what are going to be the topics, pretty much every conference, their top speaker is talking about AI. So the trend is going to continue on, having those AI conversations, people learning more and more. It's still one of those technologies which people know about, hear about. It's the buzzword. It's very easy to hold a conversation, any conversation. You could be sitting at a dinner table and AI will come up, right? So the technology's been sold, the idea's been sold. Everybody knows what is GPT, and including like my mom, and it blows me away. But everybody knows there's this tool now that helps you do something, these things better. Not everybody knows how to use it. Again, the buzzwords, like you and I were talking earlier, the buzzword is there again and again, and people are just very curious to learn. And one of the best things you can do is really help people understand how it's going to change your lives as well. Because, like you said, people are also scared because job security is becoming an issue as people are understanding that some of these tasks can be done much faster with AI. So, I don't know how it's going to impact jobs. You saw, there was a big last year wasn't the greatest for companies as they were doing more and more layoffs. And now it seems like the trend is back on hiring people. But like I said, people need to continue to think about upskilling themselves. You will become irrelevant. Like I give the example of manufacturing. When manufacturing automation happened, lots and lots of jobs were lost. But then if it didn't happen, probably you and I would be at a, factory floor making shoes or something like that.
Yeah.
So the jobs have always, like, whenever there's been a change like this, you've always seen that a higher level of jobs have been creating. Nobody's making lesser money than they were making 10 years ago. If anything, new hires are getting paid higher. If anything, they're they're valued more for the skills they bring, which is, the human. So humans are never going to be disrupted in that way. It's going to continue to change and evolve on how we do some things. And that's what we all need to embrace. I think for as 2024 comes in, that yes, we have to continue to learn. We can't stay stagnant and think that we continue to do the same job, because the same job may not exist anymore, right? Nobody was going to need perhaps the Excel expert anymore, because that's getting highly, so that sort of job is getting highly automated. So what is your next skill set going to be, and how are you going to evolve into that? So I think jobs will be changing. The way people are working will be changing. Companies need to continue to pay, attention to upskilling. And then I think adoption is starting to really happen now. And as we've seen with the latest iteration of ChatGPT4 as well, what is it, 4.5? Keep moving.
Yeah, I think 4.5's leaked. It might be,
4.5, no? Yeah.
but
I mean,
it's four still. Yeah.
yeah, it keeps getting smarter and smarter, right? Because we are also feeding the beast as we continue to ask for that information, right? It's getting smarter and smarter. And if people can understand the generative nature of AI, I think it'll click for them. A lot of people, it'll click when they understand that how, can learn and how it can then actually come up with the information. That's, I think, generative AI would see that a lot more.
Yeah.
At
I
my,
really hope that people take word of that, like the up leveling, and just you have a personal tutor that can teach you anything at better than 90% of humans in those fields. And I
yeah,
think that anyone needs to take advantage of that. Think about, like, what maybe you wanted to make a career change, but it required a 4-year degree.
yeah,
Not anymore. Like,
well,
these are the types of things that I think that people aren't realizing, but I hope they, that I think people are starting to come around to understanding, okay, this is what it's capable of. So I'm really excited about 2024. I think you're right. um you know Up leveling and upscaling is going to be the key, and you're going to start seeing mass adoption in your company if you haven't already.
yeah, me.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe we'll talk about. Maybe we'll have a conversation a year from now, see how those how the predictions and how everything turned out.
Good.
But I really appreciate your time, and good luck with everything in 2024.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time as well.